begin today in Hebrews 12. And we're going to start in verse 14, where it talks about follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Now our text is going to come from Hebrews as well as back in Proverbs, because I noticed in Proverbs in my study about anger and how anger comes up. Here we see it in the form of a root of bitterness. Now a root of bitterness can spring up many ways. A root of bitterness can also involve a false doctrine that you've allowed to take hold. A root of bitterness can be the things that Mark 4 talked about, the cares of this world, deceitfulness of riches, and lust of other things choke the word. You know, and the Bible talks about the wheat and the tares in the gospel. The wheat are the real thing. The tares look like the wheat, but when bit into, it's bitter. It's not something you can digest. And it's interesting here to notice that a root of bitterness, and many be defiled. Many are called, and yet few are chosen. What happened to the many that were called? They allowed a root of bitterness to spring up and trouble them. Sometimes we allow roots of bitterness to spring up in us without rightly dividing, without slowing down. James 1:19 is specific to tell you, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. If you're motivated by anger, frustration, revenge, you will not be able to do the work of God. You'll be out of bounds. You'll be on your own, and you'll be in an area that's not blessed. So don't allow a root of bitterness to spring up, because it will not only trouble you, it will trouble those around you. And if any of you have met people that, fly off the handle, they're angry, it's uncomfortable. They're not stable. They don't have their body in subjection to the Spirit, as the Bible talks about. And we'll touch on that topic as well. But you want to be quicker to hear and then slower to speak, which will slow down that wrath, will keep that root from springing up in you. We go out in public sometimes and you deal with people, let's say, at a store. And the line seems slow, and you're sitting there looking at your watch, and you're looking at this person. But maybe you just don't understand the fact that they may be working with outdated equipment. And maybe they're more frustrated than you are because of that fact, and things that they've brought to the attention of their employers. So we don't understand. And we meet people from day to day, and they have a history. And sometimes you need to understand that they have a history so that you know how to deal with them. And you'll notice the Lord didn't, every time he went to the temple, didn't tip the tables over first and then went to preach a message. There's a difference between the wrath of God and the wrath of man. And there's times the Lord may have you openly rebuke a situation because it is out of line. But you need to know that is of the Lord. That would be in the category of a righteous indignation, where okay, it's time to speak up. There's something not right, and I do need to say something. So in everything in Christianity, it's all about balance. It's finding the balance. A time to speak, a time to keep silence. Ecclesiastes 3 talks about that. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 13. And sometimes your interpretation of a situation may not always be right as well. You might have misinterpreted. Maybe you didn't. Is it Proverbs? I have a note here on this. Proverbs, I believe it's 18:13. Talks about he that answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly unto him and shame. That is Proverbs 18:13. Have you ever gone off the handle and said something and you turn around and go, wow, I didn't realize that there was more to the story. So if you answer a matter before you hear the whole situation, that folly and shame is on to you. That's why you want to be. That's why you, well, here, 1 Corinthians 13 talks about in verse 9, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. Now, perfect refers to maturity. As we grow and mature, we grow, and that part is our carnal understanding is done away, and it's replaced with the spiritual wisdom of God, the wisdom and knowledge of God, which is spiritual. And then we're able to understand and get that partial part removed. We're able to remove the veil, the blinders of the flesh that blind us from seeing the whole situation. That's what growing up and maturing in the Lord is about. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part is done away. Hopefully that childish part that we've still got that, what do they call it, the inner child. We've still got some inner child in us that needs to be done away, to grow up, to mature in Christ, to be complete in Him. Now verse 11, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Children will speak whatever they think. They'll lash out in anger. You know, you see children, they get mad, they scream, they holler, and they'll start swinging at someone. Well, hopefully that's not something that carries over into the adult life. With some people it does. That's the way they're brought up, and that's the way they continue, even in their adult years. But if you notice in verse 11, when I was a child, the first thing I did was I spoke. And then as a child, I understood, and then I thought. You know, so as a child, immature Christian, they speak first. Then they start going, ooh, did I just say that? And then they start thinking about what they said. When you grow up into Christ, and as we talked about in James, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, you actually change this order completely around. So the first thing you want to do is think about what you're going to say. First, understand what you're getting ready to speak, and then speaking. So this should be just reverse the order in verse 11. That's what allows you to grow up into Him. Think about what you're saying before you just spew it out there. Because once it's out there, you know, it's like the computer. Once you throw it out there, it's out there. And we need to realize how important our words are. Matthew 12:36 and 37 talks about every idle word that man speaks, they shall give account of in the day of judgment. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. You'll be one or the other. So what are you throwing out there? The Lord Himself said the words that He speak were spirit and life. And that's why God, you know, the Bible talks about gave not the Spirit by measure. The Lord did not limit God. It was unlimited, the way He allowed God to work through Him, because He only spoke and did those things which pleased His Father, is what He made mention of in John 12:49, I believe. I speak only those things which I hear from my Father. I do always those things that please Him, in John 8:29, in that area. Can you imagine being able to make that statement and mean it? But it comes down to the tongue. But you have to have yourself, body in subjection. And we can go back to 1 Corinthians 9 a little ways, a couple chapters. And I'm in 1 Corinthians 9:26. I therefore so run, not as in certainty. So fight I, not as one that beats the air. You know, like shadow boxing. But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means when I preach to others, I myself should be a castaway or a reject. The word subjection refers to stern or rigid discipline, to enslave, to subdue. One of the biggest areas of our life we need to keep in subjection is our tongue. But that's why you keep your body in subjection to the Spirit. Then you're speaking words that are spirit and life. You haven't allowed a root of bitterness to spring up and trouble you and those around you as well. Because what you're doing is you're spewing toxic chemicals out there. And it's troubling others. So you're either a fountain of life, of living waters, or, and James talked about the fountain spewing sweet water and bitter. Well, there's that word bitter again. It's not something you can digest. It's not something God's going to look. Remember what he talked about, the lukewarms. He's spewing them out of there. He's going, I can't. Ugh. I can't. We've all had rotten fruit or bit into something. Oh my God, what happened here? And your first reaction, spit it out. So you want to be quicker to hear, not slower to speak. Think about what you're saying, and don't judge a matter before you hear it. Let's go back to let's go to Proverbs 16, and we'll spend some time here in Proverbs. And Solomon, the writer of Proverbs, I almost consider him we had Paul in the New Testament. Solomon of the Old had a lot of words of wisdom. He was considered the wisest man of his time. And he talks about this topic. And I'm looking at Proverbs 16:32. And it says, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules the spirit than he that takes the city. So you have to control. You have a spirit. You have the Spirit of God within you, and you have your own spirit, the carnal man. You have to keep that guy in subjection. He wants to come out every once in a while and give his assessment, his 2 cents worth. He's got an idea. He thinks you need to, he gets a little upset. Sometimes your anger may be a result of you seeing something in somebody else that you don't like, that you know is a part of your life. This is where you have to rightly divide the situation, the word for yourself, and know, okay, is this something I need to speak about, or is this something I need to hold my peace? Sometimes giving your opinion all the time is not. I like to give my opinion when asked, rather than being one of these people, these loud, boisterous know-it-alls that always. And we've all ran across those people. Let's go back a chapter here. I'll try to keep this in an order. And Proverbs 15:1 is interesting. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So not only do you want to not allow that root of bitterness to spring up in you, but those grievous words will trouble others. Like Hebrews mentioned, that root of bitterness, and by it many be defiled. It'll defile and trouble others if you start speaking, because it's like ringing the bell for a prize fight with those grievous words. And that person's going, oh, wait a minute. You're not going to talk to me like that. And what's your first reaction? When people treat you rudely, your first reaction is, well, I'm not doing nothing for you. I don't want nothing to do with you, and you're on your own. Not only have you troubled yourself, but now you've troubled other people. And a soft answer can turn away a lot of that anger. Verse 2, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge aright, but the mouth of fools pours out foolishness. Your anger can pour out a stream of foolishness. Foolishness. Your interpretation of a situation. I know people are going to say, well, I've been wronged, and we've all been wronged. We've all been wronged in some way, but we've all wronged others as well. He that's without sin cast the first stone. We've all wronged others. So you learn to forgive. And most importantly, forget. The disciples talked about, well, how often should I forgive my brother? And the Lord said 7 times 70. So after 490, I can, no. It's, in other words, cast down those imaginations. Every time that imagine, cast it down. Get rid of it. So, and even in verse 15, you can go look at verse 18, talks about a wrathful man stirs up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeases strife. You want to be a buffer. You want to appease the strife, not be the cause of it, not be the cause of a wildfire. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. It can start a wildfire real quick, very fast. I'm going to go back to, and let's go back to 10:19 here. And in verse 19, in the multitude of words there lacks or wants, it uses the term want, but it means to lack not sin. But he that refrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the just is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is of little worth. It's a little worth. It's not something. You're not a person God can go to and use. People, well, I want to be used of God. I want God to use me. I want God to work through me. You've got to use wisdom. You've got to learn to rightly divide the word. You've got to keep that body in subjection to the Spirit. And it talks about a multitude of words. How is a fool known? Well, Ecclesiastes 5:3 talks about a fool is known by a multitude of words. They're not quick to hear. They're not slow to speak. They just, and I've met people that talk a lot, but really don't say anything. They talk, or you ask them a question and they talk, but they're really not saying anything, and you're going, by the time you walk away, you go, gee, I'm more confused than when I asked the question before. So, folks, as a Christian, let's not allow a root of bitterness to spring up. And then when you sense that, pull it. It's easier to uproot that than to let that grow, fester, and get deeply rooted. And take the time to understand and rightly divide what is of God and what is of the soul and what is the spirit. And that's what discernment is. God bless, church, and let's keep our words in the realm of spirit and life.